Lorraine looked grim as we entered her office. "I have the preliminary report from the private investigator," she said. Apparently, Caroline hadn't wasted any time. "A man came to your house last night and stayed the night. We couldn't get a look inside. I have cameras installed in the house," I said. "I can go replace the flash drives and we can see what was there." "Okay," she said. "Go and do that right now and then we can make a plan. I assume the information on those drives will be important." "There's an au pair in there," I said. "I can't go back. I have to be away on business." Lorraine checked her cell phone. "The au pair is with Sophie and James right now, at the play center," she said. "I'll keep an eye on her and let you know if she leaves there." My house was about 30 minutes from Lorraine's office, and Michelle drove fast. We got there without incident, and I changed the flash drives. I took a quick look around the house, but didn't see anything objectionable. We then went back to Lorraine's office and looked at the thumb drives. I decided not to look at the one from the bedroom. I didn't want to see what was on there. I determined that it was about a man as soon as he walked through the door. As I suspected, it was her boss, the man she had worked for the entire time we had been together, Bill Wainwright. It almost killed me what happened when he pulled up to the house. First of all, he had his own key and he walked in by himself. When he walked in, James looked up and saw him. "Daddy Bill!" he exclaimed and ran to hug him. That untied my arms. I broke down and sobbed. I couldn't watch any longer. Lorraine watched me break down. Michelle, for the first time ever, put her arms around me and held me while I cried. It took a while, but eventually I pulled myself together. "Would you like to get some rest?" Lorraine asked, and I shook my head. The pain had receded a little, but my anger was starting to take over again. "What's next?" I said. "I already have a copy of the terms of employment at your wife's firm. There is a no-brothering policy there, so you have a lawsuit against the company for violating it. Since the person your wife is fraternizing with is a top executive at the firm, there's no way the company can claim it didn't know what was going on." We explained to Lorraine what the company lawyer had told me and what he had advised. She smiled broadly. She picked up the phone and called him, asking for copies of the prenup, and he emailed them to her. "Just perfect," she said as she read the prenup. "Put aside everything I said before. Your boy's plan is absolutely right. If your partner wants to get rid of the company, then buy him out. Put everything you have into the company, and that will immediately put it out of her reach. We'll be able to sue her company for default judgment, him for alienation of affection, her for making a false statement on the birth certificate, and both of them for money still spent on the kids. The deduction for medical bills alone for childbirth is a significant amount. It all depends on whether Robert wants to sell out," I said. "I guess we'll have to wait until he comes up with an answer." Michelle drove me back to the hotel, and I went up to my room. I was about to sit on the bed when there was a knock on the door. I opened it and saw her standing in the hallway. "Let's go," she said. "You can't stay here." "What?" I asked. "Why not?" "Because you can't stay alone," she said. "You'll only be brooding or emptying the minibar. I want you where I can keep an eye on you." As she spoke, she gathered her few belongings. She took me under her arm and led me out of the room, then looked me over and led me to her car. "Where are we going?" I asked, finding that I didn't care. "To my house," she said. "I have a spare room you can use." "But," I started. She turned her head and looked at me. I stopped talking. I had never been to Michelle's house and was surprised to see that it was almost the same size as mine. Our house was 2 stories while hers only had 1 floor. She led me into a room with a bathroom. "Take a shower and change your clothes," she instructed. "Dinner in 30 minutes." We ate dinner in silence. I guess it was delicious, but I didn't feel it. My mind was preoccupied with a swirl of thoughts that would not settle down. I was furious, but I couldn't find the strength to express it. I was devastated, but I couldn't find the strength to care. All I had energy for right now was to carry out my plans. I was on autopilot, my destination determined. I was just contemplating what to do after my meal when the phone rang. I flinched, hoping it wasn't Caroline. It wasn't Caroline. "Hi, Robert," I said languidly. "Why?" was all he asked. "Robert and I have been friends since university. We studied together, and it was the project we worked on together that gave us the basis for starting the business." I got most of the company at first because I had more capital to invest than he did. Caroline is cheating on me, I said in a wooden voice. All the time. All the time? He said incredulously. You mean none of the children are mine? I told him. There was silence on the other end of the phone. So you want to tie all your assets to the company and hide behind a prenup? He asked. Either Brian Spencer, our attorney, explained it all, or he understood the partnership agreement much better than I did. I want to keep 5%, he said, and stay with the company as a consulting engineer. I'll discuss the details with human resources. The rest is yours. Okay, I said. I'll have Brian do the paperwork. Gary? He said after a moment. I'm so sorry. I know you don't feel that way right now, but it'll get easier later, I promise. I've been almost exactly where you are now, and it's actually getting easier. Just then, I remembered that about 4 years ago, he got divorced. I didn't know the details because even though we're friends, he's a very private person. I just knew that things weren't very pleasant. That's why he brought up the prenup. He used it himself. The next morning, Michelle woke me up with a cup of coffee. Come on, she said. We have a lot to do. The first thing we did was go to Brian Spencer, the company lawyer. He had already prepared all the paperwork for me to buy out Robert's share, and we finalized the whole deal in less than 30 minutes. I gave him everything I got from the house, my savings, and my 401k. I also had to take out a loan against the company retirement plan for the remainder. Now, on paper at least, I'm about $1 million in debt. My paycheck has been cut almost in half since the payments were made pre-tax. Then we went to Lorraine's. I showed her all the transaction documents, and she was thrilled. It's perfect, she said. I'll file the paperwork today. We can file it on Monday if you want. We'll serve him, her and the company at the same time. Where do you want her to be served? Wherever she is most uncomfortable, I said. If you could do it over a billboard at the Super Bowl, I'd gladly pay for it. Lorraine laughed. We'll serve it in the office, she said. Monday, 10 o'clock in the morning, provided the papers get through the court before then. If I file them today, I should have them by tomorrow afternoon. I nodded. So what now? I looked at Michelle. She was running things. Now, she said, we have 2 more stops before you go back to the office and pretend like you just got back from fighting a fire in Portland. Do you think you'll be able to stay home until Monday? I think I'll have to, I said. Don't guess, she said. Tell me what you need to help you get through until then. I don't know, I said. Any good news? She smiled at me. Let's go then, she said. I was surprised when we pulled up outside the medical center where I'd had all the tests and where I'd had the procedure that meant I'd never be a father. What are we doing here? I asked. You wanted good news? She said. Let's go. I followed her into the clinic and stood aside as she walked to the reception desk. The receptionist nodded and motioned for us to sit down. We sat down. Less than 2 minutes later, my doctor came out and invited me into the consultation room. I looked at Michelle, who made no movement to follow me. Please, I said, and she nodded and followed me. Dr. Harrington did not comment in any way on my secretary's involvement in my consultation. He knew who she was and that she was not my wife, as he was both my doctor and Caroline's doctor. Why I asked my secretary to come with me was my business, not his. Gary, he said, I understand that you want to ask about the vasectomy reversal. My eyes widened. I wondered if that was even possible. I looked at Michelle. There was a tiny smile on her face. Yes, is it possible? Of course, Dr. Harrington said. Since your vasectomy was performed 3 years ago, the success rate for reversal surgery is about 95. The surgery takes a little longer than the original and involves general anesthesia, but I'm confident that once we're done, you'll be able to be a father again. Again, my eyes filled with tears. I still have a chance to be a father. I'll have to have surgery to do it, but it's a small price to pay if it means I can have children of my own. I had no idea who I was going to have children with, but at the very least, it's a possibility. I know this is a very hard thing to take, the doctor said. Here is information about the surgery and its cost. Unfortunately, it will not be covered by your insurance. If you want to move forward, let me know and we can schedule you for an evaluation. Thank you, doctor. Michelle said as she stood up and took the information from him. We'll be in touch. I stood up too and let her lead me out of the clinic and towards her car. Is that good enough news? She asked, smiling softly at me. On impulse, I threw my arms around her and pulled her against me. Thank you, I said, burying my face in her hair. Then I realized what I had done and instantly let go of her and stepped back. I'm sorry, I said. Gary, she said softly. It's okay. We got into her car. One more stop, then back to the office, she said. I'd been to Bill Wainwright's house several times over the years Caroline had worked for him. He and his wife Stephanie live in a nice neighborhood just outside of town. It's a gated community. They do some corporate events here. Why? I asked. Michelle just got out of the car and walked to the door of the house. I followed her. She didn't even have to knock. Stephanie had informed the security guard who let us into the property that we were on our way, and she was standing at the door waiting for us. Gary, she said in greeting. You must be Michelle, his secretary? Are you the one who called? Yes, and it's me, Michelle replied. Come on in, Stephanie said. She led us into a room that looked like an office next to the hallway. I had never been in this room. Judging by the pictures on the desk and on the wall, it was Bill's office, but she sat down at the desk and pointed to the chairs across the hall. I guess she figured the call wasn't personal. What can I do for you? Stephanie asked, looking at me. I sat staring at her, unable to speak. Did you know? I finally asked. Stephanie sighed sadly. No, she said. I suspected, but I didn't know. Could never find any proof. Nothing I could take to a lawyer, or I'd take every penny the bastard had. Get in line, Michelle growled. Do you have any proof? Stephanie asked, and I nodded. Proof that none of my children are mine, that they have the same father. The video of her and Caroline at my house, where my son calls him P.A. I couldn't finish the sentence. The lump threatened to choke me, and I was lost again. Oh, Gary, I'm so sorry, she said. I'd suspected for years that he and Caroline, but he was so careful. I followed him, checked his phone, his email, even challenged him, but he managed to convince me I was just paranoid. The investigators I used found nothing. I swear if I'd been sure, if I'd had proof, I would have come to you right away. But I couldn't destroy what looked like a happy marriage based on mere suspicion. I needed to be sure, and I couldn't get any proof. What are you going to do? I wondered if I should tell my plans to my enemy's wife. I wasn't sure she wouldn't tell him everything as soon as he got home. It might be too late for him to do anything meaningful, but I wanted it to come as much of a shock to him as it did to me. The question is, what are you going to do? I answered. Now, you have proof. She smiled slightly at that. I understand, she said. And I don't blame you. I wouldn't say either. If you have the name of a good divorce lawyer, I'd appreciate it. Michelle pulled a business card out of her purse and handed it to her. Thank you. Is a week enough time? I nodded. Great, she said. I'll contact... She showed her card, and I'll coordinate with her. She stood up. Apparently our meeting was over. Michelle and I stood up. Stephanie walked over and gave me a brief hug, smacking my cheek. Again, I'm so sorry, she said. Look after him, she turned to Michelle, who flinched as she hugged me. He deserves better than what that bitch did to him. We went back to the office, and I spent the rest of the day finishing up the things I had to do while I was in Portland. At the end of the day, I drove home. At her usual time, Michelle knocked on my door, peeked in, and said she was going home. She was back to being the professional she had always been. This, too, caused me to feel a sense of loss. I felt like I was starting to grow closer to her little by little, but that must have just been my imagination. I said goodnight to her, thanking her for her help. I was working late at the office. I had a lot of catching up to do. What time will you be home? I got a text from Caroline around 8. Probably another hour or two. I have some things I need to finish up after my trip. I'll probably be asleep by then. I have to get up early in the morning. Love you. Once again, I couldn't bring myself to reply to this message. I continued working until almost 11. Really wanted her to be asleep when I got home. The less I had to talk to her, the better I would feel. When I got home, the house was in semi-darkness. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I looked in on Sonia and James. Both were asleep and looked as adorable as ever. I felt a sob start in my chest, and I had to hide in the bathroom. I couldn't let Caroline catch me crying over babies that weren't even mine. I still hadn't decided what to do with them. It was unlikely any of them would remember me if I just walked away from them. I have no responsibility to them, but I still loved them both. How can I leave them when less than 48 hours ago they were my children, my flesh and blood, my pride and joy? And now they are just further proof of my whore wife's infidelity. I decided to wait and see what happens next. In any case, the decision might not be made in my favor. I went to bed, doing my best not to wake Caroline. I didn't fall asleep right away, and when the alarm clock woke me up in the morning, Caroline had already left. When I walked into the kitchen, the helper was there and was feeding the kids. I looked at her. She had to know. There was no way she didn't know. Could she still be looking at me now and laughing at the stupid hubby who couldn't even satisfy his wife? Did she know the children weren't even mine? Did she take the children to say goodnight to Daddy Bill, as she often did to me? My mind was guessing, and I imagined her and Caroline having a dirty threesome with Bill Wainwright and the kids crying in the next room. I shook my head angrily. She knew, I decided, and I'm going to take great pleasure in firing her on Monday. I'll make sure that little bitch never works as an au pair again. I'm going to tell the agency that... Wait, what am I doing? I'm taking my anger out on someone who has no hope of doing the right thing in this situation. Damned if you do, and damned if you don't. If she had told me, she would have lost her job. She could have left, I reasoned. But then, it seemed she also had feelings for our children, whom she'd been looking after since before Sonia was born. I'm angry, but probably at the wrong person. I went to work. When I got there, Michelle was already in the office. It was as if the previous few days had never happened. She was all business, though I noted in my planner that she had cleared my day for what she called marketing. I settled into my office, and she brought me my morning coffee, as she had done every day for the 9 years she had worked for me. Then she sat down on the other side of the desk. Only then did I notice that she brought coffee for herself as well. This is something she had never done before. Marketing? I asked. Since when have I been marketing? She grinned. The smirk was rather bitter, and for some reason it gave me a warm feeling inside. We need to make a plan, she said, the last part of Lorraine's strategy. I looked at her, not understanding. What? I said. Tell everyone, Michelle said. Her friends, family, church groups, volunteer groups, everyone and anyone she comes in contact with needs to know what a slut she is and what she's been doing. It's not going to present me in a good light, I said. I'd become a laughingstock, a cuckold, not even able to satisfy his wife, raising other people's bastards. You must tell your story, she said. If you don't, Caroline will, and believe me, it'll make you look a lot worse than an uninformed cuckold. How about an abusive husband, or someone who abuses his children? People will believe this shit, and when we nuke her, she'll respond with everything she's got. Speak out first, and people are less likely to believe any counter-accusations. Some will, of course, but that can't be helped. Michelle put together a media pack containing all the evidence of Caroline's infidelity. There was a private investigator's report, copies of the DNA report showing that I was not the father of my 2 children. There were copies of videos taken in my house, including the one showing James saying hello to Bill, and bedroom videos that I hadn't watched and didn't want to watch. Later that morning, I received an email from Lorraine. Apparently, Stephanie had provided her with a sample of Bill's DNA. She cross-checked it against the DNA test I had gotten, and it turned out that he was definitely the father of both children. I paused. Children? I thought, suddenly no longer thinking of them as my children. We included this new information in the packet and prepared it for shipment. They would be sent to Caroline's parents, my parents, Caroline's brother and sister with whom I was very close. Electronic copies will be sent to all her contacts on Facebook and LinkedIn, and anyone else I can send them to. The ones addressed to our immediate family, I paid the courier company to deliver at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. That's when the balloon was due to go up. I just need to get through the weekend. I had a plan to make it happen. Since I am an engineer, it took me less than an hour to design and build a small device. It had a motor, a timer, and a battery. I could set it up so that the motor would spin, creating a vibration after a certain amount of time. I came home Friday night, and after the au pair left, I hid the device under Sophie's pillow. It was supposed to go off at 6 the next morning, which is about the time we usually wake up. It would wake Sophie up, and therefore our weekend morning sex would be eliminated. It worked perfectly. I was woken up by Sophie coming into our room and climbing into bed with us. Now, there was no sex for us. I smiled to myself. I had managed to keep myself busy for the whole of Saturday, doing all the chores that Caroline had demanded of me for months. When she commented on it, I just said it was high time I did them since she'd been bugging me for so long. Saturday night, when, oddly enough, Caroline tried to provoke sex, I pretended to be asleep when she came out of the bathroom, and on Sunday her daughter came into our bedroom again, having been brought out of sleep by my device. On Sunday, we decided to go out with the kids and spent the day at the zoo. There were several times during the day when I looked at Caroline, the woman I loved, the woman I thought loved me, and the two children I had custody of, convinced they were mine, and nearly broke down. I bit the inside of my cheek until it bled, trying to contain my emotions, but made it through the weekend. On Monday, I was excited. I told Caroline I'd be working from home. I wanted to talk to the au pair. Caroline left for work at her usual time, poking her head into my office to tell me she was leaving. I pretended to be absorbed in email and only hummed in response. I heard her car pull out of the garage and the door close. I looked at my watch, 8:15. An au pair knocked on my office door. She wanted to take the kids to the play center, but I said no, they should stay home. This surprised her. I had never said no to her before, but she just nodded and went back to the kids. I could hear how upset James was that he couldn't go and he wanted to so badly. A little after 9, Michelle pulled up to the house. I was surprised, but let her in. For the first time since I'd known her, I made coffee for her. At 9:30, we had a teleconference with Lorraine. "Gary," Lorraine said, "this is your last chance to stop. I'm not saying you should, just pointing out that if you changed your mind over the weekend, now is the time to say so." "No," I said, no doubt about it. "I'll see you on the other side then," said Lorraine. All set. I kept an eye on my email account, waiting for the confirmation of services emails to arrive. At exactly 10 a.m., the first one came, the second 3 minutes later, and the third 5 minutes later. Then my phone rang. It wasn't Caroline as I thought, but my mom. "Gary?" she started. "Hi, Mom," I said. "What's going on?" she asked. "Did you read the package I sent?" I asked. "Yes, but—" "Then you know as much as I do. Caroline has been cheating on me, probably my entire married life with her boss. The kids aren't mine. I'm divorcing that bitch." "Gary can't—" "No, Mom, look, I gotta go. I got other calls to make." I disconnected. The phone rang again immediately. This time it was Caroline. "Gary?" I didn't answer, waiting for her to continue. "We need to talk," she continued. Still no answer. "I'm coming home." She interrupted the call. "Caroline is on her way," I said to Michelle. "I'll get out of your way," she said. I wanted to ask her to stay, but I didn't know how to do it. I just looked up at her. "Call me," she said, "when you know what's going on," and walked away. About 20 minutes later, Caroline arrived home. I heard her car pull up in front of the house. She didn't even bother to pull into the garage. I didn't know what to expect when she walked into the house. I didn't know if she'd walk in with gun in hand or slip in with her tail between her legs. Anyway, she walked into my office and sat across from me at my desk. "Gary, she started. "Not interested," I said, interrupting her. "But—" "Not interested," I said. "You don't even want to—" "No," I said. "I don't want to hear one fucking word out of your mouth. 9 fucking years you've been lying to me. None of the kids are mine. But you convinced me to get a vasectomy while you were still on the pill so you could continue to have Daddy Bill." Her eyes widened at that. "So no, Caroline," I continued. "I'm not interested in what you have to say. The lawyer's business card is in the bag you got when you were served. If you have something you think I should know, talk to her." "What about the kids?" she asked. "What about the kids?" I replied. I don't have children, and if it were up to you, I would never have them. I would ask you why you did this to me, but I don't want to hear another lie. I'm not interested in your excuses, justifications, or reasons. I just want this to be over so I can pick up what's left of my life and move on. I called the au pair into the room. I knew she could hear me since my office door was open and she was just in the next room. You're fired, I said, right now. Get your shit together and back off. What? She said. Why? Because you covered for her, I said, pointing at Caroline. You knew she was sleeping with her boss. I don't know if you knew the kids were his and not mine, but you definitely knew what was going on. I have video evidence of you talking to Bill about the kids. Get out. Gary, Caroline said, you can't fire her. I pay her salary. The au pair looked at Caroline with a look of gratitude in her eyes. Okay, I said. I've already contacted the agency and informed them that you were complicit in an extramarital affair, and I've agreed not to take any action against your company if they take you off the books. So if Caroline wants to keep you, not only will she have to pay you, but she'll have to take care of everything else, like taxes, vacations, retirement, sickness, not to mention insurance. The au pair's face lost color. Not only was she losing her job, but she was being cut out of the agency's accounting department. This would make it nearly impossible for her to find another au pair job. Agencies shared information with each other. Now get out, I said, and she ran away. Did you have to do that? Caroline asked. She didn't have to. You're talking again, I said. I told you I didn't want to hear it. What I want is for you to get your stuff, get your kids, and get out of my house. It's my house too, she said. Not according to the deed, no, I said. It's titled in my name only, so until the courts decide otherwise, get the fuck out! She jumped slightly as I yelled. James walked into the room. Mommy, he said. That's where Sonia fell down. Caroline, with a stunned expression on her face and tears on her cheeks, got up and went to her daughter. I closed my office door and stayed inside while she gathered her things. A few minutes later, she returned, holding Sonia in her arms. Aren't you going to say goodbye to Sonia? Don't tell me, I said. She's not my daughter and he's not my son. Take them to Daddy Bill and let him take care of his offspring. They're none of my business. Gary, Get out! I heard the front door close, and a few minutes later her car started. She drove off. I let out the air I had been holding in for what seemed like an eternity. I shattered to pieces. I didn't hear the door open, and I jumped when a pair of arms wrapped around me and I fell, resting my head on my hands. I looked up and saw Michelle holding me. She pulled me to her and held me as I sobbed. It took me a while to pull myself back together. I had just thrown away 9 years. My marriage, my children, my life was gone. I really didn't want to look at the world anymore. Once again, Michelle took matters into her own hands. Let's go, she said. Lorraine said it would take Caroline about 4 hours to get an emergency warrant to occupy the apartment. Since she has children and this is a matrimonial home, she'll be back. Do you really want to give her the pleasure of kicking you out of your own home? We packed some of my clothes and all my important papers. I needed to figure out where to stay, but I loaded both my car and Michelle's car with my belongings and left. We drove to the office first, where I was served later that day. Lorraine called me to expect service. Not only was there an order to occupy the house, but there was also a restraining order, meaning that I was not allowed to come within 100 yards of the house. If I wanted to take anything, I would have to make an appointment and be accompanied by Caroline's lawyer at my expense. Not realizing how this happened, I find myself moving into Michelle's spare room. All my clothes are in the closet, and all my papers are now neatly stacked in the cabinets in the office. It had been a week since Caroline's paperwork had been filed. I would work and then go back to her house with Michelle to eat and then sleep. In the morning, she would bring me coffee, make breakfast, and then we would head to the office together. Nothing seemed to have changed between us. She was still all business, and other than a hug when I crashed at my house on the first day, I never once smiled at her. Not that I had much to smile about anyway. Monday morning, we had an appointment with the lawyers for the company Caroline and Bill worked for. I didn't know the details, but apparently we had filed a claim for an amount the company couldn't afford. They have insurance, but it had a maximum of $1 million, and we were suing for an amount well in excess of that. Their attorneys were businesslike. Lorraine, my lawyer, grinned like a Cheshire cat. "What would it take," the lawyer asked, "to get you to agree to this?" "An immediate and comprehensive dismissal with forfeiture of the senior member's pension," Lorraine replied, "and a commitment to keep Caroline on the payroll for at least 3 years and $1,500,000. I didn't really listen as they exchanged words. In the end, they agreed to all of the above, but I would only get $750,000. That would at least pay off some of the debt I had to the company's pension fund. "It will all be paid after the divorce is finalized," Lorraine said. They nodded, understanding. Lorraine stayed with us for the next meeting. It was a meeting with Bill Wainwright's lawyers. I walked out of their office $500,000 richer. I now had enough money to pay off the pension fund loan in full, while still having a small amount of money on hand. Or so it would be after the divorce. My last appointment of the day was with Caroline's lawyers. Caroline was in the office with them, but didn't look at me when I walked in. Michelle was with me, as was Lorraine. "This accounting in the divorce petition is ridiculous," Caroline's attorney began. "Your client is the majority shareholder and CEO of a company that is worth about $20 million, according to recent estimates, not to mention the assets in the house, savings, and 401k. I propose—" "Let me stop you there," Lorraine said, pulling a stack of papers out of her briefcase. "According to the prenuptial agreement signed by all parties, the company is not subject to division in a divorce. My client recently made a significant additional investment in the company that took up most of his savings, his entire 401k and a loan taken out against his house. He also had to take out a loan from the company's retirement fund. One of the partners wanted to get rid of the company, and it was important that the stock not fall into the hands of a competitor who had been trying to take over the business for several years. Because the loan from the pension fund means he now has a reduced salary, he is now being paid less than your client, and I would be asking the court for some sort of maintenance agreement so that he can hold out while he finds himself." "What about the children?" her attorney asked. "There is DNA test evidence that these children are not his," said Lorraine, "that she deliberately falsified the birth records to list my client as the father with the intent to defraud. In addition, and this is a separate issue, we are going to recover damages for serious harm when she knowingly persuaded him to have surgical sterilization, which he agreed to under the belief that he was the children's father. The alternative is for your client to sign the divorce petition as is, pack up her belongings, and leave the marital home in his hands. She will receive half of the joint account, the balance of which is currently $9,443.15. The lawyer looked at the papers, at the prenuptial agreement, and then at Caroline. For the first time, she looked at me. "Gary, please," she said. 9 years, I replied. 9 fucking years. You've been lying to me for 9 years, day in and day out. You have nothing to say to me that I want to hear." Caroline looked at her lawyer and nodded. She signed the papers. When she checked out of the house, I wasn't around. I had just gotten a letter from her lawyers saying that the restraining order had been lifted, and the house was now mine. I could return to it at any time. I thought about it, but decided against it. Instead, I put the house up for sale. It didn't quite match the amount I owed the bank, but I made up the difference, and the bank walked away happy. 2 months passed, and I was still living in Michelle's spare room. After our divorce, Caroline had moved in with her parents. Despite all the evidence I provided, they were firmly on her side and wouldn't speak to me. This was not a loss to me. For some reason, Stephanie didn't divorce Bill as she had promised. I didn't know why, nor did I want to find out. Because he lost his corporate job and his pension, they had to sell the house in the gated community and move into a small apartment. Bill still had connections and marketable skills, so he was able to find a reasonable job and was making a living, although not as much as he used to. I didn't know that he and Caroline were still dating. I hadn't seen her since that day at her lawyer's office and wasn't interested. I was sitting at my desk at work when there was a knock, and Michelle entered the room without waiting for an answer. "Bill Wainwright is dead," she said without preamble. "What?" I asked. "How?" "Apparently Stephanie caught him with Caroline again," she said, "and shot him." I leaned back in my chair, a wide grin appearing on my face. I tried to wipe it away, but I couldn't. "Good riddance to him," I finally said. Michelle laughed. "Am I evil?" I asked her. "For being happy about this?" "Not at all," Michelle said. "That scumbag got what he deserved. By the way, this was just delivered." She placed an official envelope on my desk. I looked at it with trepidation. We both knew what was in it. I took it and opened it. "This is it," I said. "I'm free at last." "Finally," Michelle said. Then she did the last thing I expected. She kissed me. It wasn't a peck on the cheek or even on the lips. It was a full-blown kiss, with tongue, with lips squeezing my toes. When she finally let me go, I leaned back in my chair, breathless, amazed and hard as the mainmast of a T-clipper. She giggled, looking down and seeing my obvious arousal. "For 9 years," she said, "I have cared for you. You're the most perfect man I've ever met. You've never once even looked at me wrong, ogled my legs or my ass or groped me, and for that I've loved you. I waited 9 years for you. And now you're free. I know you've always respected me, and that's a kind of love, too. We make a great team. I know you as well as any wife knows her husband, and if you think about it, you know me just the same. Give me a chance to show you that not all women are lying, cheating, conniving bitches. Please." I was stunned. I remembered all the time I spent with her before I found out about the affair. I thought about how I'd treated her. I had fervently defended her against my business partner, to the point of getting kicked out of the business. At that moment, I realized that I had and still have real feelings for Michelle. I guessed that it was impossible to work closely with someone for so long and not develop something. While I was with Caroline, there was no need to explore those feelings, to evaluate them. But now there is definitely such a need. "Will you say something?" she asked. There was a look of concern on her face. It was the first time I'd ever seen her unsure. "How much?" I asked. She looked puzzled. "How much of what?" she asked. "Children," I said. "How many children are we going to have?"